You think you can mess with me? The male voice cut through the room, cold and confrontational. Under dozens of watchful eyes in the school cafeteria, Nathan Moore, a tall 12th grader and captain of Lincoln High's football team, clenched his fists so tight that his knuckles cracked. Standing opposite him was a girl, brown hair tied back, neatly slender figure, wearing a gray hoodie and simple jeans. She slowly lifted her head, and when her eyes met Nathan's, the entire room held its breath. No panic. Just a stare. Chillingly calm. "I'm not messing with you, Nathan." Her voice soft, yet clear. "I just hope you won't make me show who I really am." "And who are you supposed to be?" Nathan scoffed, arrogant. He had no idea that in just 5 minutes he'd be lying on the pavement behind the school, and that story would ripple across the district like a tidal wave. Her name was Aria Lane. And this was only the beginning. You won't want to miss what happens next. Hit follow to stay with Aria's journey from underestimated girl to the one who changed her entire school forever. Monday morning in the small town of Maplewood, Ohio. The fog hadn't lifted as Aria Lane walked through the gates of Lincoln High. This was her 4th school transfer in 3 years, the result of her mother changing jobs and trying to start over. Aria blended in, average height brown ponytail, oversized sweatshirt, dark jeans. Every detail planned to go unnoticed. But what no one knew, and if they did, they might not dare look at her the way they were, was that Aria had once been the youth MMA champion of Michigan. 4 grueling years training at a top gym in Detroit with a fight schedule intense enough to send adult opponents to the hospital. There was only one reason she hid it all, her mother's plea. "Start fresh, Aria. You know how people react when they find out you can knock someone out in 30 seconds? We just want a normal life." Aria had nodded, though a part of her resisted. In Detroit, she was respected for never letting anyone walk over her. In Maplewood, she was just another new girl. A new girl. And no one at Lincoln High had any idea. They were about to awaken a beast long kept in chains. First lunch break at Lincoln High. Aria chose the farthest table in the corner of the cafeteria, hoping to stay invisible. She ate slowly, wishing every passing glance would breeze past like a wind over empty benches. But then came the heavy footsteps, deliberate, loud. A tall boy dropped himself onto the seat across from her, flanked by 2 others. "Hey, new girl," he said, voice booming. "I'm Nathan Moore. This is my school, my rules. And those 2, Kyle and Derek." Aria looked up polite. "Hi, I'm Aria." "Where you from?" "Detroit." Kyle sneered. "Yes. Ooh, big city." "You think you're better than us? I don't think that," Aria replied, still eating, but Nathan wasn't done. He leaned in, lowered his voice. "Listen up. There are rules here. Newbies pay $5 a day, call it safety insurance. 'Cause who knows what might happen to a lonely girl." Aria met Nathan's eyes. His were predator-like. Kyle was grinning, eager for a show. Derek stood behind, silent, waiting for something to break. "I'll think about it," Aria said calmly. "You've got until tomorrow." Nathan nodded, generously. Before leaving, he whispered, "And don't even think about telling a teacher. They love us. My dad funds the football team." As the trio walked off, Aria sat still. Beneath the table, her hands clenched. One strike perfectly timed could send Nathan to the ER, but her mother's promise hung like chains. Still, something inside had already shifted. That night, Aria lay on her bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Nathan's mocking smirk, Kyle's laughter, Derek's hand on her shoulder, all playing on a mental loop. In Detroit, this would have ended in 10 seconds. No shouting, no threats, just a single clean strike. But this wasn't Detroit. This was Maplewood. And she had made a promise. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number, her coach of 4 years. A deep voice answered, "Master Julian speaking." "This is Aria Lane." Aria. He sounded surprised. "Everything okay at the new school?" "It's fine. Mostly." She paused. "I'm having trouble with some bullies." Silence. He was listening, calculating. "You know your mom asked you to stay under the radar. I've tried, but if I keep quiet, they'll keep pushing. Every day, a little more." His voice grew firm. "Listen to me, Aria. There's nothing wrong with self-defense. But be smart. Not in class. Not in public. No lasting injuries. I remember every lesson. And this time, I'm not calling for permission, just to remind myself who I am." "Good," he said quietly. "Because at some point you can't keep pretending to be weak." When the call ended, Aria placed her phone on the desk, eyes gleaming in the dark. Tomorrow. If it had to end, it would end on her terms. The next afternoon, the school hallways began to empty. Aria sat quietly in the library, turning pages without reading a word. One question echoed in her mind. Was today the day she'd break her final promise to her mother at 4 p.m.? Aria left the library. The campus was nearly deserted except for a few teacher cars. She headed toward the athletic field where she knew Nathan usually worked out late. As the gym doors creaked open, Nathan stepped out alone, sweat still glistening on his brow. Seeing Aria waiting by the walkway, he smirked. "Well, look who's back. Soup Girl's revived, huh?" "We need to talk," Aria said calm. Nathan folded his arms arrogantly. "Talk all you want. But don't expect mercy. Tomorrow the whole school's seeing your soup-covered face. I've already picked the caption." Aria stepped forward. "I have a deal. 1-on-1. No interference. If you win, I'll pay you $10 a day all year. But if I win, you leave me alone. And apologize. Publicly." Nathan burst out laughing. "You think this is a movie? I'm a foot taller, gym 6 days a week. Played football since I was 10. "Then you have nothing to be afraid of," Aria said softly. Something in her eyes had changed. No fear, no hesitation. Nathan suddenly felt a chill. "Fine. No rules. Anything goes." He agreed. They stepped into the empty parking lot. Nathan took off his jacket, showing off his muscles. Aria calmly removed her hoodie, revealing a simple t-shirt. She stood tall, hands relaxed, seemingly unguarded, yet fully ready. "Last chance to back out?" Nathan smirked. "Thanks. But no," Aria replied, and time seemed to stop. Nathan lunged like a storm, a straight punch aimed at her face with full force. In a blink, Aria tilted her head, left twisted her body, and thud, a short, precise punch landed squarely in Nathan's solar plexus, the body's breath-stopping pressure point. Nathan dropped to his knees, speechless, eyes wide in panic. He gasped, but couldn't inhale. Aria stood straight. No heavy breathing, no rush. "Rule 1 of fighting," she whispered. "Never underestimate your opponent." The next morning, as Aria walked into Lincoln High's main corridor, she sensed something different. The looks people gave her no longer mocking or curious, but respectful. Or fearful. Maybe both. And then the unthinkable happened. During class change, Nathan Moore, the same boy who had dumped soup on her in front of the school, walked up, stood before her, took a deep breath, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm sorry, Aria. I acted like a jerk. What I did was wrong." The entire hallway froze. Aria looked at Nathan, said nothing, and gave a slight nod. That was all she needed. From that day forward, no one dared bother Aria again. But more surprisingly, Nathan and his friends Kyle and Derek became her quiet protectors. At the first sign of bullying, even a glance from Nathan made everything stop. A week later, Aria was approached by a group of girls led by Jessica, the school's most popular and vibrant student. "Aria," Jessica said softly, "we heard. You know martial arts?" Aria tilted her head. "Why do you ask?" Jessica bit her lip, glanced around, and whispered, "Because we're in trouble, and no one can help. Except you." This time, Aria didn't need to think, because sometimes staying silent is the wrong choice. But helping others is never optional. It's a duty. That afternoon, Aria waited by the rear school bus stop, backpack at her feet, a book in hand, unread. A storm was building inside her. Minutes later, Jessica and 3 other girls appeared standing nearby, anxious. As expected, 5 well-dressed boys from Westside High swaggered into view. The leader, a tall blonde with a neck tattoo, strode toward the girls. "Well, well, the princesses from Lincoln," he sneered. "Step aside, Travis," Jessica said, trying to stay calm. "We're just talking." Travis smirked, reaching toward her face. That's when Aria rose. She stepped between them, voice soft but firm. "Excuse me, you're blocking the bus stop." Travis turned, scanned her, then laughed. "Who are you?" "Their bodyguard." "I go to Lincoln. These are my friends." He stepped closer, threatening. "Walk away, unless you want to get hurt." "Try me," Aria said, eyes unflinching. One of his guys, gold-toothed and sneering, moved behind her, reaching for her shoulder. "Big mistake." Without turning, Aria snapped her left elbow backward, bam, striking him in the gut. He folded over, collapsing silently. Before Travis could react, Aria spun, charged, and struck a hook to the ribs, then a knee straight to the face. Blood sprayed from his nose. He crumpled like a felled tree. The remaining 3 froze. They knew this wasn't a bluff. "Anyone else?" Aria asked. Not loud, just razor sharp. No one moved. "Take your friends. And remember, if I ever see you near this school again, you won't like the outcome." Jessica and her group stared wide-eyed, stunned. "You really know martial arts?" one whispered. Aria nodded. "I learned so no one has to feel the way you just did. If they ever come back, just say one thing. What Aria's coming." The video from the bus stop, secretly recorded by a student, spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares in 2 days. Most hailed Aria Lane as the warrior of Lincoln High. Others wrote, "She's the reason I stood tall today." But not everyone approved. 3 days later, Aria's mother received a lawsuit. Travis's family, the blonde attacker, accused Aria of causing serious injury. Travis needed stitches, had a fractured cheekbone, and emotional trauma due to assault. On Monday morning, a police car arrived at school. Aria was escorted outside, not handcuffed but under hundreds of stares. She walked tall-faced calm, no excuses, no shame. The school erupted. Some were outraged. The system punishes the innocent. Others hesitated, questioning. Is she dangerous? On court day, the hearing lasted 6 hours. Travis's attorney argued passionately. a teen trained in martial arts with no restraint, is more dangerous than any weapon. But when Aria's lawyer played the video showing Travis as the aggressor, the first to touch the one who threatened, and Aria's response, clearly measured, justified, the courtroom held its breath. The judge struck the gavel. Miss Aria Lane is found not guilty. Her actions were lawful self-defense, appropriate, and morally commendable. The room erupted. Aria didn't cry, but when she stepped outside, Jessica hugged her tightly, and for the first time ever, Aria heard words she'd never expected from a stranger. Thank you for not staying silent. After the court ruling, Aria thought she could return to peace. But she was wrong. No one saw her as the new girl anymore. Now the name Aria Lane carried weight and responsibility. A week later, the principal called her into his office. Aria, do you know why no one has ever stood up against bullying in this school? She shook her head. Because the first to speak always takes the hardest hit. You've done what even adults often avoid. He placed a folder on the table, his gaze serious. Would you consider helping us launch a student honor council, a board elected by students to resolve bullying, violence, and overdue apologies? Aria stayed silent. She hadn't come looking to lead. But this time, she couldn't walk away. 3 weeks later, in Lincoln High's grand auditorium, Aria Lane stood at the podium, facing over 800 students and the entire faculty. Beside her stood the principal, a school board official, and 3 students who had once been bullied. I used to think silence was the only way to survive, she began, voice steady. But I've learned that if we don't speak up for ourselves, we lose the voices of those who can't protect themselves. Applause erupted. Then people stood. The entire auditorium rose to their feet. That day, the Aria Lane Student Honor Council was founded. She was voted its first president, not to punish, but to restore respect and dignity in every student. There were no more soup dumps, no more threats. And if any rose again, they'd be stopped not through violence, but by a cultural shift from within. Aria didn't win hearts by striking them. She touched them with truth. 3 years after stepping into Lincoln High with a tight ponytail and an old backpack, Aria Lane returned not as a student. She was the guest of honor at the new class's graduation ceremony. She stepped up to the podium, and unlike her first speech this time, she had nothing left to prove. Because beside the school flag in the hall stood a large portrait of her hand over heart, with the words engraved below. Silence is never an option. Aria Lane. Since that trial, Aria had used her platform to launch the Courage and Self-Defense Training Center for girls statewide. In just 2 years, over 3,000 students from 18 schools had enrolled. They didn't just learn to block punches, they learned to say no, to stand tall, and most importantly, to believe in their worth. At Lincoln High, the Honor Council still stood strong. No longer a symbol of Aria, but of every student who once stayed silent and now dared to speak. Jessica, the girl who once trembled at the bus stop, was now vice principal. Derek, who once stood behind Nathan, had become the school's counselor. And Nathan, he had once called Aria quietly, "Thank you for waking me up in every sense." That day, as Aria left campus, a freshman girl ran after her, tugging her sleeve. "You're Aria Lane, right? I heard you once dropped 5 guys in 10 seconds. Aria smiled, bent down, and whispered, "No, sweetie. I just learned how to stand up at the right moment. And that was enough. And if you're staying silent in the face of something wrong, maybe it's time you step forward just like Aria did. Because change doesn't start with a shout. It starts with a step, a word, a heart that won't back down."